at boot camp Parris Island, October 1, 1942. And after boot camp to Camp Lejeune, rifle range, and a little preliminary training at Camp Lejeune. December of 1942, I was age at that time 17. And then we shipped out as members of the 15th Replacement Battalion from Camp Lejeune to San Diego in the latter part of January 1942. After a brief stay at San Diego Marine Corps Base, we got on board the Lurline ship cruiser and shipped out to American Samoa, where we participated in several weeks of Marine Raider training. And then after this training, we shipped out to New Caledonia and then right on a brief distance right to Guadalcanal, which had been secured at that time. We joined a new 3rd Marine Division at Guadalcanal, and I was in the infantry at first and transferring to the 3rd Amphibian Tractor Battalion a short time later. In this organization, I spent the entire World War II and all of my experience in the battle. And in leaving for the first battle in 1942, latter part of 43 rather, we had to take the island of Bougainville. That was the first combat. And then we participated in island hopping. The next combat was at the island of Emaru. And then a short time later, the battle of retaking the island of Guam. And again, I was crew chief of the Amtrak and 3rd Amphibian Tractor Battalion, Company C. And then this was our headquarters, as a temporary headquarters established at Guam until we were to go to our next combat, which was to be Iwo Jima. And in leaving Guam, we went the short distance to Saipan, which recently had been taken from the Japanese by a different Marine division. And at Saipan, we met with the 5th Marine Division combat team, which was to go with us, and we had a team there to take Mount Suribachi at Iwo Jima. And we didn't learn our target until we got on board the ship with the combat troops from the 5th Marine Division. And so after about a 3 to 4 day trip from Saipan to Iwo Jima, we pulled up in the middle of the night just off the island of Iwo Jima, and we got very little sleep on board that LST. Now, the LST is a ship which was used primarily for taking the amphibian tractors up to about 16 on board the LST to actuate the amphibious landing. And so the night before D-Day, we got very little sleep, as you can understand. And then along about 3 a.m., we assembled down below deck in a tank deck along with the 5th Marine Division troops that were to land on the island of Iwo Jima right at the foot of Mount Suribachi. And we had the eggs, steak for breakfast, and the chaplain had a prayer with us, and then we were ready. The troops got on board the Amtraks, and we were anxiously awaiting to exit the ramp of the Amtrak and get out into the water and head for the beach. And as we were heading for the beach, in the third wave of that D-Day landing, assault wave, my Amtrak was all the way on the left side of the formation in the third wave. And the battleship North Carolina was blasting away at Mount Suribachi. And I went to within about a football length. There was nothing between me and the battleship North Carolina. All the Amtraks, the rest of the Amtraks, were on my starboard or right side. And the explosions were tremendous as we passed the battleship North Carolina. And then we moved on in closer to the beach. And it seemed very quiet as we approached the beach, and bear in mind we were in the third wave. And as we got even closer to the beach, the quietness was interrupted by Japanese machine gun fire, which was not too far away at this point. And the bullets were bouncing off the cab of my Amtrak, and I was always the driver of the Amtrak. And there had been armor plate put on the Amtrak before we left Guam. And this saved my life because the bullets were bouncing off. And then as we landed on the beach, it did seem quiet at that point. And very little shelling from the Japanese and that type of thing. And so we had a squad or a platoon of Marines, some of which I never met personally, but I know that some of them were with us on board that LST were the team that went up on top of the mountain and raised the flag. I didn't know any of them personally. Then we were there on the beach, and the troops were jumping off the side of we call it the gunnel of the Amtrak. We didn't have the ramps on there like some Amtraks had, where the troops could go right out, walk right out. They had to go up over and down onto the beach that way. And so that was the only trip that we went into the beach where we carried troops. Every other trip that we made coming into the beach was with ammunition or, in some cases, flamethrower fluid and armament-related items that we brought in. And I'll add right now that there were waiting at the beach supposedly other types of vehicles such as special jeeps and in some cases some tanks that would deliver, or 6x6 as we called some of them, some of the things we were bringing into the beach, deliver these to right directly to the front line where the 5th Marine troops were fighting. Well, for the first 3 to 4 days, up until about the time that we took Mount Suribachi, we didn't stop at the beach because these other vehicles were not able to negotiate past the beach. We had tracked vehicles that ran in either the water or the land, of course. And we took the ammo and other things right directly to the troops, and literally handed them to the troops as they were fighting. And I went back to the LST for a load to bring back to the beach a little before noon on D-Day. And at this point, all hell had broken loose from the Japanese who were firing from all over Mount Suribachi, where they had these gun emplacements placed. And there were people falling around, and some were blown out of sight, and terrible combat conditions existed there. And so after delivering the ammo, etc., to the troops, then another trip out to the LST and repeat. And this sort of thing went on maybe 2 more trips before it was too dark to go out to the ship anymore, the LST. And then the night came along, and we, as Amtrak crewmen, had to always stay on the beach. We didn't get to stay on board a ship at all. At night, in combat, we lined up on the beach, and we served as a defense against the enemy coming around the water behind us, behind the troops, and sneaking up on them that way. And we had some action there. And my Amtrak, we had some troops, some of the Japanese, sneak in there, and they were close enough that we actually, along with some other Amtraks, shot them down and killed them right on the spot. And this was the middle of the night. And it was like daylight there. Nobody slept for 3 straight nights because the flares lit up everything, and the fighting went on all night long, and the shelling and all that went on all night long. And so then this continued for 3 successive nights and days. And so on the 3rd day, when the shelling was still so intense, and this was in the morning, we were almost through unloading just a few boxes of shells, and the fighting of the bombing was so intense from the enemy that my crew, there was 3 of us, a crew of 3, and we jumped off of the Amtrak there. We were probably 100 yards from the beach, and we rolled into a shell hole just to get below the surface of the ground, keep from getting cut down by shrapnel. And 10 minutes later, it let up. The shelling did, and that was our signal to jump into the Amtrak and head back for the LST. Unfortunately, when we did that, we got out into the ocean about halfway back to the LST, which was about 1.5 miles from the beach. Then the Amtrak started listing to the starboard or the left side, and within minutes it drowned out, no more power. And then we started drifting. Bear in mind that I was on a route going back from the beach to the LST, which looped out to the right side of all the congestion of the other ships. And there was not anybody close enough to call on to help us in our situation, and we just drifted. And we kept drifting, and the thing that really was bad for us is the radio was not working. We couldn't contact my radio. And then I started signaling some of the small Navy ships I thought might be close enough to see us, and that didn't work. So we just kept drifting, and we were going to drift out to sea. So after drifting for over half an hour, probably 45 minutes, here was this big ship that came into view. It was the biggest ship that we could see out there. and it turned out to be the command ship of the entire operation, the El Dorado. And on board there was the command officers, the generals, three-star generals, Highland Mads Smith, Marine Corps, and Admiral Turner of the Navy. And so we drifted right up into close to the huge screw or propeller of the ship. And just before we were about to make this, the propeller was gradually turning. And before we struck that, I said, "Jump off, get into hit the water." And two of our crew did, and the other fellow stayed on board the Amtrak. So we thought he was a goner. But actually, he survived, and they picked him up. He went on out the other side of the ship, which that side of the ship, everybody was there looking through binoculars, etc., at the action on the beach. And so it was a half an hour before they picked us up out there in the water, the other two of us, and they brought us on board the ship. And just as I got into, the swells were tremendous out there, and they tried to have us board the ship by getting on the gangplank. And that didn't work because the swells brought the small boat that we were on, they picked us up in, and crunched a hole in the side of it. And so they dropped a rope ladder down, and we waited until the swell brought us up not too far from the deck, and we didn't have far to climb, which is very fortunate because our hands were just frozen. It's unbelievable how cold that water was out there. And so on board the ship, the first thing that I faced was two three-star gentlemen. First one, Highland Mads Smith, or Holland M. Smith, and he was chomping on a cigar, 62 years, and he's the father of amphibious warfare for the Marines. And he said, "What the hell happened to you?" And then I told him what happened to us. And they took us down below deck and gave us a lot of fluids and hot coffee, etc. And then they outfitted us with new marine clothing. And we thought we were all set to spend the night on board that command ship. But then one of the officers called our captain and explained the situation to him. And he said, "You're not going to spend the night on board that ship. Get your butts in here right now. You're going to spend the night on board this on the island." So they took us into the island and dropped us off there at the beach, and we had to spend the night there. And then the next day is the day that the flag was raised on top of Mount Suribachi. And since the three of us didn't have an Amtrak at that point, then we had binoculars that someone loaned us that we were able to watch the first flag go up. And that was in the morning. And then this is D-Day plus 4. And so then later in the afternoon, this is about 3 hours later, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Then the second flag, we could see the patrols going up with the flags, and they've met very little opposition, have been neutralized on the side of the Mount Suribachi. So we got to see both flags being raised on Mount Suribachi, standing on the beach. Then the captain, commanding officer of our company, said, we have an order in for another Amtrak to replace yours, and it'll be here about 2 days, in about 2 days. So in 2 days, we got our brand new Amtrak to replace the old one, and started this is after Mount Suribachi had been taken, and the Marines, which had lost over half, almost half dead on the assault wave group, was decimated. A lot of replacements out there. And then my job, our job as a three-man crew, for several days after that was to take the worst wounded out to the hospital ships. And more than one, quite a few of the Marines, and in some cases a few Navy corpsmen, so forth, never made it alive out to the hospital ship. Several died on board Amtrak. And that went on day after day, as we went on up the island, and our division was along with the 3rd Division and the 4th Division fighting their way up the island, and which didn't end the battle until the 26th day of March. It was 5, almost 6 weeks battle, which expected to be no more than about a week to 10 days. And so that virtually tells the basic story about my experience on Iwo Jima, but there is a follow-up on that, and that is that the Amtrak did not sink for a day and a half. This was told to me later. But our Amtrak did not sink for a day and a half. A destroyer escort went out and fired 2 shells into it and sank our Amtrak. And this was the 2nd day after this happened out there that we lost the Amtrak. And so the Amtrak sank to the bottom of the ocean several miles off of the coast of Iwo Jima. And interestingly enough, someone found some pictures of an Amtrak similar to the one that we were on, or had, on the floor of the ocean a few miles off of Iwo Jima. And it's hard to tell. It's been all those decades, it's been rusting and so forth on the floor of the ocean. And that could well be my Amtrak, our Amtrak, down resting on the floor of the ocean down there. So I think this gives you a good idea of the most of the things that happened to us there at Iwo Jima. And I might have left a few things out that I had intended to say, but this gives you a good idea, I think, of what action on Iwo Jima was like, looking at it through the eyes of Marines in the 5th Division. And there's one other thing that my good friend turned out to be decades later, that I met Rubel Beecham, and it was determined in reviewing some of our action that he was on, actually Rubel Beecham, the late Rubel Beecham, as far as we could determine, was on my Amtrak that hit there at Iwo Jima on D-Day. And Rubel was wounded there, and wounded twice, as a matter of fact. And as I said, that's decades later, we met each other, and that was something that was really stood out in my mind, that as I recall back on some of the people I met later that were in combat there. So that's pretty much it for now. Thank you.